because you're supposed to have all the problems that are there. So the background need to lead to all the problems you can find. Not only one problem that you're solving, all the problems. So it must be enough to be able to understand that. What is the level of the background? How much do you have to write? How should somebody else understand what you're going to write? Or what you want to say? Well, the thing is that I usually say, think about the one sitting next to you. How much knowledge do you think that person have or has in the area of what you're writing about? And that is a good level, because your thesis is going to be read by somebody else in your class or course or at a similar level. So there are some knowledge already that you should have, so that you may not have to write. But at the same time, as I say, the definitions may differ. So even though you have the same knowledge, the definition is different. So when you want to know which is the detail level, you need to describe something. Ask somebody in the same course. Can you understand this? Is it good enough? I mean, some of us have a group supervision, then you can do it there, but some of you will not. So then you can maybe ask somebody else to check it. What is scientific in this is that you always argue for what you use. You cannot just say, this is the theory. You need to tell the theory, choose what you want to say, and argue why you choose this and not something else. That's the scientific part. We are obligated to show that we have read other authors' material, and then we are obligated to tell what the other had been doing. And then we argue why we think it's good or not so good for you to use. It may be hard to say, well, I don't really like this one. It's not really valid. It's hard to say that. So, because meaning, if you say something is not valid, it means that you have a lot of experience and you need to show why it's not valid. But you may think that, okay, this technique had been used, but it's not applicable on what I'm doing, and that's good enough. So that's enough as an argument why you don't want to use it, because you can't apply it as it is. So that is the background level. Do you recognize this? Do you recognize everything I say? Okay. Accepted sources then. What is an accepted source? What do you say? What is not an accepted source? What do you say about Wikipedia? It's not an accepted source, is it? Nope. What should you do instead?
Like it is different, what's it called? Like, for example, IEEE.
Yes. Yeah. The journals from IEEE, conferences or journals, yes. Others?
Well, I mean, you have to decide if the source you're referring to is actually trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you decide that with, of course, where you find it, but also if you find a web page that you want to use and it's a copyright in the end, then it's a trustworthy source. But just don't use one. Try to use several that says the same, because then you know it's trustworthy. What is a primary and secondary source? You remember?
Secondary that he has referenced someone else.
Yes. Yeah. The primary is the original paper. The secondary is somebody who had referred to the first one. And we always strive to get the primary source, because that's the one that we know comes from the person who did it. Is a secondary source really bad? Well, actually, they might have an interpretation that can be interesting to you, but you need to make sure that the reader understands that it is a secondary source, which you have to tell them, that it is taken from somebody who referenced another one. And just tell that why this is very interesting to you. Quote, size of quotes, number of quotes, change of quotes, breaks in quotes. Do you know about these? What we usually say is that we can't have two big size quotes. We can only have a couple of sentences. And if you want to show something that is interesting in a quote that becomes bigger, you can make break in the quotes. You know how to do that? You have a brackets and dot, dot, dot. Show that this is a break. You're not allowed to change in the quotes. So if it's a misspelling, you have to have the misspelling. Okay? Number of quotes. In a thesis like 40 to 60 pages, you're only allowed to have like 3-4 quotes. That's it, not more. So if there is a thesis that will have big chunks of quotes, then you need to tell that this is not valid enough. You can't trust it. So it has to be their own work doing something with the material. Okay. Show critical thinking, because that's what you're doing in your thesis. So what is critical thinking, and how do you show it? I mean, commonly when you have a Swedish school, you are rather drilled in it. You know, critical thinking is that you don't trust all the sources all the time. I don't know how this is in other schools. I can just talk for the country here. But critical thinking is when you don't just trust what you read. You always have to have another source that says the same. So at least 2 or 3 or more sources. Because you might run into a group that thinks something. And if you run into that group and you only use the material from that group, you actually may be leading to a wrong direction, and you might base your work on that wrong direction. What will happen then? If you use wrong background or controversial background, not wrong, but controversial. What will happen?
You get an incorrect conclusion.
Yeah. So your whole result will be based on the controversial material. So therefore this is very, very important. The background, the literature study is extremely important. But how do you show critical thinking? How do you show that you have looked at the literature and really been critical about it?
Refer to different sources.
Refer to different sources, absolutely. But you also argue in the text. And how do you argue in a text?
Well, often you can ask yourself why and why not.
So if you ask those questions all the time and then write about why or why not, for each and every part you stumble on, you always tell why or why not. Then you start to show critical thinking. One of the things that I usually say when it comes to writing thesis is about books. How old is a fresh printed book? What do you think? What do you believe? How old is a fresh printed book? Say that it was printed February 2017. How old is it, you think? The text in it, the material? 3 years? 2 years? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2, 3 years, something. Yeah. It takes time to publish books. So when you get one from 2017 and you think, this is great stuff, it's new stuff, then you know that the author had been writing this part and revised it and write it and revised it, and it's maybe 1,000, 1,200 pages. And write and rewrite, that number takes a lot of time. Then 3 years may not be enough. How many pages do you produce per day, you think? What do you think? 5 pages? Yeah. If you write about your own work, 5 pages